Art used to look like this: structured, detailed, easy to understand, but somehow we ended up here. Messy, chaotic, nothing like before. Some say beauty died, others say art was never about beauty at all. But what if both sides are wrong? What if the real story isn't about beauty, but something much bigger? To find out, we need to go back to when art had rules and watch them fall apart. Art has always mirrored the world around it, but for most of history, it wasn't really about self-expression. It was about rules, tradition, and most importantly, power. Kings, popes, emperors, they used art to set the rules, to tell people what mattered, what was beautiful, and what counted as truth. Beauty wasn't just personal, it was political, a way to show off strength, control, even divine authority. But history is messy, right? We're talking thousands of years, countless movements, endless artists. And let's be real, there's no way we're covering all of that in one video. So instead, let's skip ahead, past the Renaissance, Baroque, and Romantic eras. All important, all fascinating, but not today's story. Because there's one turning point, one critical moment when art finally stopped following the rules. To understand this, we gotta land in 19th century France. At the time, France wasn't just influential, it dominated the art world. And the reason? One institution, the French Academy. Picture the Academy like the ultimate gatekeeper. They controlled everything. The Salon, the single most prestigious art exhibition in Europe, was their turf. And if you weren't in the Salon, you didn't exist. No commissions, no patrons, no career. The Academy didn't mess around. They set strict rules. Acceptable art had to be historical, mythological, or religious. Noble subjects, idealized bodies, flawless finishes. Everyday life? Forget it. Basically, art had to reinforce society's perfect vision of itself. Beautiful, grand, unquestionable. But for the artists, this was suffocating. Imagine devoting your life to mastering a skill, only to realize you're trapped painting the same scenes, the same myths, the same impossible perfection, forever. Artists weren't just bored, they felt trapped, invisible, and voiceless. Frustration simmered quietly for years, and by 1863, it finally boiled over. That year, the Academy rejected more paintings than ever before. Thousands of works were dismissed as failures. The artists didn't just feel embarrassed, they felt erased, forgotten, humiliated. The anger became so intense that France's first president and... wait, also the second emperor? Yeah, don't ask. Anyway, Napoleon III stepped in and was like, fine, have your little pity gallery, the
Salon des Refusés.
Or, in a less insane language, the exhibition of rejects. It was supposed to shut the artists up, make it all go away. But instead, it ignited a revolution. Because at the heart of this Salon of Rejects was one painting that changed everything. Edouard Manet's Luncheon on the Grass. At first glance, you might think, okay, what's the big deal? It looks kind of classical, carefully posed, balanced, composed. But look again. Something's off. Something unsettling. A nude woman sits casually with two fully clothed men, outdoors in broad daylight, and she's staring directly at you. This wasn't mythological nudity, the kind of people we're used to, you know, goddesses, symbolic, distant, safe. But Manet's woman was ordinary, contemporary, real. She wasn't shy, she wasn't symbolic, she was just there. And people hated it. Critics didn't just dislike it, they called it filthy, disgusting. even an insult. Why? Because Monet wasn't playing by the Academy's rules. He refused to idealize reality. He painted life exactly as it was: awkward, uncomfortable, direct. And this wasn't just some guy breaking a few rules. He was dismantling centuries of tradition in a single stroke. Without even realizing, Monet had just kicked off modern art. For the first time, painting wasn't about rules or beauty or making people feel noble and inspired. It was about confronting reality, even if that reality disturbed you deeply. Meanwhile, outside the Academy's rigid walls, the world was changing faster than ever. Industrialization reshaped cities overnight. Technology altered daily life. Society was accelerating rapidly. The Academy's perfect, polished visions of the past suddenly felt hopelessly outdated. Artists faced a crisis. If their purpose had always been to reflect idealized reality, but that reality had drastically changed, what exactly were they supposed to paint? And just as they grappled with this existential question, something new appeared, making their entire struggle seem pointless: photography. Now, you didn't need years of training to perfectly capture reality, just the push of a button. Portraits, instant. Historic events, documented perfectly. That meticulous imitation of life, the very thing artists had built their identities around, was obsolete overnight. This wasn't just scary, it was devastating. Imagine spending your life becoming great at something, only for a machine to instantly replace you. Oh wait, that's AI. Anyway, artists weren't merely anxious about their careers. They felt their entire identity slipping away, and suddenly they were staring down a terrifying question. If painting didn't need to capture reality anymore, then what was it even for? But here's the incredible thing. This existential crisis was exactly what painting needed. Monet had forced art to confront reality head-on, and photography went even further. It proved realism alone wasn't enough. It didn't undermine Monet's rebellion, it amplified it. Art could no longer just imitate. It had to move beyond reality altogether. And out of this deep uncertainty, out of these urgent questions, something completely new was about to emerge. Something radical, vibrant, and bold. Impressionism. Hey, if you're enjoying this journey through the world of art, consider subscribing. It helps me keep going. If artists couldn't compete with reality, they had to do something different. But what? The Academy didn't offer answers, just repetition. Paint noble heroes, grand myths, perfect allegories. Pretend the world hadn't changed, pretend photography didn't exist. But outside, reality was getting harder to ignore, and for some artists, the silence became unbearable. They started hanging out at a cramped, smoky cafe in Paris called
Café Gerbois.
This place wasn't random, it was the spot for artists, writers, and philosophers who didn't fit into traditional circles. Here, they ranted about constant rejection, how the Academy made them feel worthless, how financial pressures were crushing their dreams. Claude Monet was broke and desperate to paint something real, not stiffed posed scenes, real sensations. Quick side note, Monet and Manet, different guys. Don't get it twisted. Anyway, Edgar Degas couldn't stop chasing movement. Dancers, racing horses, crowded cafes, anything that felt alive. Renoir was sick of perfectionism. He wanted to show friends laughing, people genuinely enjoying life's small moments. Camille Pissarro painted quiet, rural scenes, ignored by the Academy. And Berthe Morisot, she painted quiet, intimate moments. Women reading, children sleeping, sunlight through curtains. But in a world that saw serious art as a man's domain, that alone was radical. Yeah, they argued a lot. but they shared one powerful bond. They'd all been told their paintings were worthless by the salon. Rejection after rejection after rejection. But then came the breaking point. In 1873, after yet another brutal rejection, Monet and his friends finally snapped. They were done begging for permission. Why keep asking gatekeepers who didn't respect them anyway? So they did something radical. They decided to set up their own exhibition. No judges, no academy, no outdated rules. They called themselves the Anonymous Society of Painters, Sculptors, Engravers, etc. Not exactly a name that screams rebellion, but that was kind of the point. Hide a revolution under a pile of paperwork. Even better, they chose the abandoned studio of a famous photographer named Nadar for their exhibition. It wasn't just ironic, it was symbolic. Photography represented everything they wanted to move past. They were sending a clear message. Art wasn't about copying reality anymore. On April 15th, 1874, 2 weeks before the official salon, their doors finally opened. Visitors expected realism and froze. The paintings looked unfinished. Obvious brushstrokes, rough textures, splashes of color everywhere. Nothing neat or refined. Forget myths or heroes, just real, everyday moments, quickly painted to capture life as it rushed by. But one painting stunned everyone. Monet's impression, Sunrise. At first, people couldn't make sense of it. You can tell it's a harbor at dawn, boats floating, sun rising, but nothing feels stable. Boats blur into silhouettes, colors shift and blend. Monet didn't care about showing a perfect harbor. He was chasing a feeling. The chill of morning, that weird uncertainty right before sunrise. Those colors you see for a second, and they're gone. And that was exactly the difference between Monet and traditional realism. Realism was all about getting it right. Every line, every shadow, everything had to be perfect, like a machine made it. Monet rejected that completely. He painted emotional, subjective reality, something deeply personal that no photograph could reproduce. Critics didn't just dislike this, they were furious. Louis Leroy, a respected critic, sarcastically mocked Monet's painting as merely an impression, a lazy sketch, unfinished and sloppy. To Leroy, real artists produce detailed, refined, fully completed works, not vague, quick impressions. But underneath all the sarcasm, you could tell he was scared. Impressionism didn't just break the rules, it shattered the core belief that art had to be precise, stable, universally understood. It didn't just mess with technique, it messed with something way deeper, the idea that reality itself was stable, knowable, objective. And Leroy's sarcastic insult unknowingly named the revolution. Impressionism was officially born. Visitors were baffled, plenty laughed, some walked out annoyed, dismissing it as nonsense. But quietly, beneath that confusion, something clicked. People realized paintings could speak directly to their own experiences, capturing feelings they'd always known but never expressed. For once, art felt relatable, intimate. Commercially, though, the exhibition bombed. Low attendance, mounting debts, failure felt terrifyingly real. If this experiment flopped, their careers might never recover. But quietly, behind the scenes, something had started. A few collectors paid attention. The word spread, slowly. And over time, people began to realize art didn't need perfect realism. It didn't have to compete with photography at all. Instead, painting could express life itself, chaotic, imperfect, uncertain, and beautiful, precisely because of those imperfections. But even Monet's soft mornings and glowing harbors started to feel limiting, and some artists began to wonder, What if you didn't have to paint the world at all? That idea was exciting, but also terrifying. If you let go of reality completely, what's left to hold on to? That's the question Post-Impressionism was about to answer. Post-Impressionism didn't start with a plan. There was no manifesto, no single direction, just a group of artists standing at the edge of something new and deciding to jump. If painting didn't have to copy the world anymore, then what was it for? Some froze, others panicked, but a few, they leaned in, they stopped chasing what things look like and started painting what it felt like to be alive. Not just color and light, but memory, emotion, pressure, pain. It wasn't a movement, not yet anyway. Just a bunch of painters stumbling through the dark, each one just trying to figure out what the hell to do next. And while all of that was happening, the world outside was shifting too. Cities buzzing, machines taking over, lights burning through the night. People were more connected than ever, but somehow felt more alone. Life was speeding up, getting louder, but not clearer. So instead of trying to explain the chaos, they painted through it. And no one did it more powerfully than Van Gogh. Van Gogh didn't paint to please, he didn't paint to impress, he painted because he had to, because he was trying to hold himself together. He painted like something was clawing its way out of him. His brushstrokes didn't land softly, they lashed the canvas. His colors didn't blend, they collided. Critics called it ugly, chaotic, even insane. But Van Gogh wasn't aiming for approval. His life had never fit the mold. He tried everything, religion, teaching, book selling, but nothing stuck. Nothing felt right, until he found painting. Suddenly, the chaos inside him had somewhere to go. Painting became his voice, the only way he could scream without making a sound. And his canvases became diaries of emotion, messy, intense, completely out of control. But even that wasn't enough. In 1888, Van Gogh left Paris and moved south, chasing calm. He dreamed of building an artist collective, a studio of the South, where creators could live and paint together, free from the constraints of the art world. But it didn't work out. The artist came and went. The loneliness stayed. His mental health became worse and worse. He spiraled, hallucinations, mood swings, a growing sense of dread, and after one breakdown too many, the famous one where he cut his ear off, he checked himself into an asylum in Saint-Rémy, and it was there, locked in a small room with a barred window, that he painted his most iconic work, The Starry Night. At first glance, it feels peaceful, a sleepy village under a glowing sky, but look closer, and the peace dissolves. The stars don't twinkle, they churn, like whirlpools, the clouds twist and shiver, the moon burns too brightly, like it's pulsing with pressure. The sky is alive, and not in a comforting way. Meanwhile, the village below sleeps, quiet, still, untouched by the storm above, and between them stands a cypress tree, dark, towering, like a flame frozen mid-reach. It cuts through the painting like a scream, bridging the calm and the chaos, the living and the dead. He didn't paint a view, he painted the mind on fire, and we know that not because we guessed, but because Van Gogh literally told us. In a letter to his brother Theo, he wrote, "This morning I saw the countryside from my window, a long time before the sunrise, with nothing but the morning star. The view was overwhelming. I am trying to capture it in a painting." He wasn't painting what he saw, he was painting what he felt. And that changed everything, because now painting didn't have to reflect the external world at all. It could reflect the internal one. A swirling sky could be a panic attack. A tree wasn't just a tree anymore, it could be a prayer. A color could carry grief. Van Gogh cracked something open, and there was no putting it back. But that shift, it came with a cost. If art no longer needed to reflect the world outside, then what was holding it together? Even at his most unhinged, Van Gogh never fully let go. His skies still looked like skies, his villages had rooftops, his emotions were wild, but they still had walls around them. But that line, the one between reality and feeling, was already cracking, and the artists who came next, they didn't want to fix the crack, they wanted to smash the whole thing, and that's exactly what Cubism did. For centuries, art was basically a window into the world. Even when the styles got looser, louder, more colorful, you could still tell what you were looking at. A figure was still a figure, a landscape was still a landscape, but that illusion was about to break. By the early 1900s, artists were already pushing boundaries. Expressionists twisted faces into screams. The Fauves set their canvases on fire with wild, unnatural colors. But even then, reality was still hanging on, until Picasso stepped in. By his mid-20s, Picasso had it all: recognition, wealth, patrons. He could have coasted, polished his technique, played it safe. But Picasso hated playing it safe. To him, art felt like it was lying, pretending the world still made sense. He wanted something raw, something honest, and he found it in the last place he expected, the Museum of Ethnography at the Trocadero. The place was dark, dusty, it smelled like rot. It was packed with objects taken from across Africa, the Pacific, and the Americas. Ritual masks, sacred statues, ceremonial tools, all stolen, stripped of context, shoved behind glass. Most Parisians walked through that museum like it was a trophy case, but Picasso didn't. At first, he wanted to leave. He called it disgusting, but something made him stay. He kept looking, and something shifted. These weren't just artifacts. These objects didn't care about looking pretty. They didn't smooth things out. They didn't idealize. They tore things apart. Sharp lines, warped shapes, faces that didn't flinch. They were magic things, he later said. He didn't fully understand them, but he didn't need to, because suddenly, something clicked. Painting had been lying, pretending the world was still whole. But the world wasn't whole anymore, so why should art be? He rushed back to his studio, picked up a brush. At first, it was a scene artists had painted 100 times. 5 women in a brothel. Soft bodies, composed poses, familiar stuff. But it felt fake. He erased, redrew, erased again. Distortion wasn't enough. He had to break it. And then, the young ladies of Avignon took shape. 5 women, or what used to be women. Their limbs twisted, their faces frozen, their flesh carved into angles, hands like claws, no depth, no softness, nowhere to hide. And 2 of those faces? Masks. Picasso would later contradict himself, sometimes denying he'd ever seen African art before painting it, other times crediting those masks with changing everything. Historians still argue about it, but either way, something from that museum followed him home. And he wasn't the only one. Other artists had also turned to the so-called primitive art, but not to learn from it, not to understand it. They stripped it down and used it as a wrecking ball, something to smash European tradition without looking back. Whatever the source, the effect was the same. Gone were the soft curves, gone was the illusion of space. Now it was all flat, confrontational, sharp. These weren't just women, they were weapons. They stared you down, they didn't want your approval, they wanted you to flinch. Picasso didn't paint a scene, it was a knife through the canvas and through tradition. And when he showed it to his friends, they recoiled. Matisse saw it as an insult to art. Derain joked, one day they'll find you hanging behind this canvas. Even George Brake, already experimenting with abstraction, was shaken. He said it felt like drinking kerosene. The painting sat in Picasso's studio for months, unshown. Not because he regretted it, but because he didn't even know what it was. Was it a breakthrough, or had he gone too far? And then breaking back. Only this time, he didn't look away, he stepped closer, and side by side, the two of them started taking the world apart. They broke down faces, rooms, instruments, landscapes. Everything became fragments, angles and planes, edges and voids. They weren't painting what things look like. They were painting what it felt like to watch the world crack open. Cubism was born. And suddenly, painting wasn't a window anymore. It was a puzzle. No depth, no center, no answer. Just the pieces. And while they were breaking down canvases, outside, the world was about to break down. Not angles and planes on canvas, but trenches, bombs, and bodies. Cubism didn't just reflect the modern world, it saw the cracks before they exploded. Because once you start breaking things into pieces, you don't always get to decide what comes next. For centuries, war had been a subject of art, a way to show courage, glory, sacrifice. It filled paintings, monuments, epic poems. Brutal, yes, but still wrapped in meaning. Then came World War I, and that illusion fell apart. This wasn't glory, it was mass death. Soldiers weren't fighting, they were being fed into machines, mowed down, gassed, buried alive in trenches that never ended. The war didn't want heroes, it wanted bodies, as many as possible. By the end, millions were gone. So what was left? A whole generation staring at the wreckage, trying to make sense of a world that didn't anymore. The things that were supposed to give life structure, religion, philosophy, even art, they all led here. And if that path ended in mud and madness, maybe the path itself was broken. That's when something new appeared, not an art movement, an anti-art movement. It was called Dada. Dada wasn't trying to make something beautiful, it was trying to blow the whole idea of beauty to pieces. If the world had become absurd, then art had to reflect that. So they made noise, chaos, nonsense. They cut up newspapers, pulled out the words at random, and read them out loud as poems. They screamed gibberish in smoky cafes and called it theater. They glued literal trash into sculptures, not to impress anyone, but just to piss people off. Dada wasn't about harmony or truth, it was about protest, not just against war, but against the culture that made war possible. And no one pushed that protest further than Marcel Duchamp. In 1917, he submitted a personal urinal to an art show, turned it sideways, signed it R.Mutt, called it the fountain. That's it, a factory-made object placed in a gallery. People were outraged. It wasn't art, it was a joke, a prank, a big middle finger to tradition. And that was the point. Because if a urinal could be art, then what even was art? Was it about beauty, skill, emotion? Or was it just about who had the authority to say something was art? The fountain didn't answer that question. It made sure you couldn't stop asking it. And once that door was open, there was no closing it. Tristan Tzara took it even further. In 1918, he published the Dada Manifesto. It wasn't just a rejection of tradition, it was a rejection of the idea that any system could carry real meaning in a world like this. It turned contradiction into art, chaos into some kind of messed up philosophy. Tzara claimed the best art was no art at all. But that didn't mean Dada was hollow. It was absurd on purpose. It used nonsense as a weapon to reflect a world that had lost the right to call itself rational. Still, rejection can only take you so far. Once you torn everything down, what's left? By the early 1920s, Dada had burned out. Some artists vanished, others moved on. The chaos had said what it needed to say. But it didn't fix anything. It left behind a silence. and for a while, no one knew how to fill it, until the world burned again. World War II didn't reopen the wound, it made it deeper. This wasn't chaos, it was calculation. Hiroshima, Dresden, Auschwitz. This wasn't just the horror of battle anymore, it was something colder. Systems designed to wipe people out. Entire cities incinerated, human lives turned into numbers. There was nothing left to glorify. Just ruins, trauma, silence. Some artists tried to rebuild, to restore meaning with heroes, flags, noble symbols. But after Auschwitz, what did nobility even mean? Others turned to realism, bombed out streets, gaunt survivors. But even that felt tidy, like trying to capture an explosion with a whisper. It just didn't work. What was happening inside couldn't be painted from the outside. And so, a new generation of artists stepped forward. I can't cover everything, because after a war like that, there was no single movement that could. Dozens of styles emerged, some turned to order, others to chaos. Some searched for meaning, others gave up looking. But in this video, we're staying with the breaking points, the moments when art didn't try to restore the world, but just sat with the weight of what had broken. And this time, that story didn't unfold in Europe, it happened in New York. The war had shifted everything. Paris was shattered, its artists scattered. New York became the new center for safety, for reinvention, for art. And in the middle of it all stood Mark Rothko. Born in the Russian Empire, he came to the US with nothing, no language, no stability. He had already lived through one collapse, and now, from a city still standing, he was watching the world collapse again, and trying to make sense of it. At first, he turned to ancient myths, symbols, figures from long-dead stories. But the more he painted, the more it felt wrong, like using fairy tales to describe a funeral. So he let go. No more characters, no more narratives. In the years that followed, Rothko's style began to shift, slowly, then completely. The figures disappeared, the stories fell away, color took over, form softened. He stopped painting what things look like. He started painting what they felt like. And that's when the art world came knocking. In the late 1950s, Rothko was offered the biggest commission of his career, a series of murals for the Four Seasons, an ultra-luxury restaurant inside the brand new Seagram building, a modern skyscraper rising over Manhattan. This was it, a chance to cement his legacy, to have his work seen by the elite. Every night, he accepted the job, but as he worked, something shifted. The paintings got darker, the colors heavier, maroons, blacks, blood reds. The shapes lost their outlines. They started pressing outward, filling the frame. The series became known as the Seagram murals. Let's just look at one, black on maroon. From a distance, black on maroon looks simple, but step closer and it begins to move. The maroon seems to breathe. The black presses in. The edges blur like wounds that never closed. No image, no story, just presence, just you and the weight of what you're feeling. These paintings weren't made to be admired, they were meant to be entered. So when Rothko pictured them hanging in a fancy restaurant with people laughing and clinking glasses, he hated it. I hope to ruin the appetite of every son of a bitch who ever eats in that room, he said. He canceled the commission, stored the paintings away, refused to hand them over. This wasn't just some gig, it was the art world's biggest stage, and he walked off it. Because this wasn't decoration anymore, it was grief, held in place by color. Rothko had stripped away everything, figures, symbols, narrative. until only experience remained. A space where you stood alone, no answers, just feeling. And he wasn't alone. Other artists in New York, like Jackson Pollock, were doing the same. Not painting images, but emotion, energy, presence. Later, people would call it abstract expressionism, but it didn't start with a name. It started with a need to say something you couldn't put into words, to feel something a scene couldn't explain. Pollock threw paint like a fight. Rothko turned silence into a sanctuary. They weren't trying to describe the world anymore. They were trying to make sense of it again, from the inside out. And it worked, but only up to a point. Because once art becomes pure experience, once you let go of images, stories, and even form, what's left? Rothko took us right to the edge, but someone else was about to take one final step into the void. The world was changing fast, again. The war was over, the old rules were gone, the old meaning too, and in the ruins, a strange kind of freedom appeared. But freedom's not always comforting. Sometimes it just means no one's in charge anymore. And into that uncertainty stepped Yves Klein. At first, he didn't seem like the guy who would change everything. He wasn't a rebel in rags. He wore a suit. He talked about art like it was a form of magic, and he became famous not for what he painted, but for one thing: a color. International Klein blue. He had it custom made, an ultramarine pigment chemically stabilized to stay electric, matte, and impossibly deep. He didn't want it to represent anything, he wanted it to be something, not a picture of emotion, but the emotion itself, pure intensity, pure presence. He started covering entire canvases with it. No figures, no scenes, just that one overwhelming blue. They weren't paintings, not in the traditional sense. They were environments, portals. Klein wasn't interested in art you could understand. He wanted art you could feel without needing to explain it. But even then, he knew something was missing, because that blue, no matter how infinite it looked, was still trapped on a surface, still hanging on a wall, still tethered to the old world of objects and frames. And Klein couldn't shake the feeling that art didn't need any of it. He tried something weird. Klein announced a solo show, Paris 1958. People dressed up. Security stood at the door in ceremonial uniforms. Drinks were served dyed with Klein blue. The whole thing felt less like an art show and more like a cult ritual. And when the doors opened, there was nothing. No paintings, no sculptures, no sound, just a white room. 4 walls, bright lights, empty, space. The exhibition was called The Void. Some visitors laughed, others stood still, a few left, but the room didn't feel empty, it felt strange. People reported a pressure in their chest, a stillness that made the air feel heavy. The sound of their own footsteps echoed back at them. There was nothing to look at, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something was looking at them. And in the middle of it all, Klein said quietly, "This is the art." It wasn't just about emptiness, it was emptiness. No object, no image, no performance, just you in the room with your expectations, your discomfort, your body, your breath. Klein didn't destroy the art object, he removed it. Duchamp opened the door. He asked, "What even is art?" Klein walked through it and asked something even harder. Can art exist without anything at all? Art didn't need form or skill or matter, just the experience of being there. It was the final break. The void wasn't just another bold gesture, it was the outcome of everything modern art had been moving toward. And not long after, modern art at least as an art period, ended. The image was gone, the object was gone, even the artist was optional. All that remained was a frame, a room, a viewer, and a question that refused to go away, because once nothing can be art, well, maybe anything can. And that's where we've been ever since, not in a new movement, but in the space Klein left behind. There are no rules, no center, no consensus. Art isn't something we agree on anymore. It's something we wrestle with. And maybe that's the point. So let's look back one last time. Art began as law, a polished reflection of power and order. It gave the world ideals to chase, a beauty to believe in. But rebellion cracked that mirror. Monet, artists who chose the present over the perfect. Fragmentation followed. Van Gogh turned vision into emotion. Picasso turned bodies into puzzles. Then came collapse. Duchamp turned a urinal into philosophy. Rothko turned color into mourning. And finally, Klein. He didn't try to fix what broke. He took the frame off the wall, opened the door, and walked away without telling us what to do next. Now, we're standing in what's left. It wasn't beauty that died, it was certainty. And in its place, something harder. You have to choose. There's no longer one idea of what art should be, just a question that won't go away. If anything can be art, what do you want it to be? If you enjoyed this video, I think you'll like the one about how Hitler tried to destroy modern art. Check it out.